Historical reenactment is a strange hobby, that much is certain, but I believe it's also an important one in helping to educate the public and raise awareness of history's value. Of course, it's also an awful lot of fun, and whether you're portraying a First World War soldier in the muddy trenches, an Anglo-Saxon artisan crafting a totem, or perhaps a regimental wife doing the army's laundry, it's a fascinating way to step into the past and experience a different world, at least in part. But the question remains, and I am often asked it, how does one become a reenactor? What are the requirements? And what should you expect from the process? Well, in this video, I hope to answer all of those questions and to put you on a good start for your joining this wonderful hobby. Right, of course, after a brief, and I do mean very brief, word on behalf of my company, the Native Oak. The Native Oak is the umbrella term for all that I do, be it making over 200 free videos for you all to watch here on YouTube, or publishing a brand new book about trauma and privation and suffering throughout military history called Something Like Philosophy. And before too long, it will also be so much more besides. For example, I'm currently 40,000 words through my first ever fiction book, historical fiction that is, book project. And I've also got an historical board/card game in the works, sort of a World War I strategic decision-making kind of thing. And of course, if you enjoy all of this history stuff, you might also enjoy visiting the Native Oak's website, where I post a wide variety of primary sources, as well as free-to-read PDFs in the library section. And before all too much longer, there may even be some in-person events that you can register for there as well. And of course, from all of these wonderful historical happenings, I donate 1/10 of all the profits to a variety of charities. Indeed, the Native Oak has already raised over £20,000, $25,000, for a wide variety of museums, reenactment societies, veterans associations, and other charities besides, like animal hospitals and homeless shelters. So if any of that interests you and you would like to learn more, check out the newly improved website, nativeoak.org, and thank you for your time. Now about that reenactment, the first thing you need to understand is that it's a hobby, sometimes a form of volunteering, but not an occupation. Except in rare circumstances, like, say, working with a historic site, like a museum or a fort or something, or maybe giving private tours, you shouldn't expect to make money out of this, and in fact will typically spend a fair amount for the privilege of taking part, which we'll talk about later. Maybe in the future I can make a video about, potential income streams you can generate with reenactment. But again, it's really usually not the case, and for now, we're just talking about getting into the hobby for the love of history. So that said, what are the requirements? Well, we're going to go through them by category, starting with academic requirements, of which there are none. Nice and easy way to get through this one. To become a reenactor of any time period, you do not need to be an expert. When I joined my first group for the American War of Independence, I knew practically nothing about the war, and I had only just graduated high school. You don't need a degree, you don't need to be working as a historian or anything like that. Instead, what's important is that you're willing to learn and to research your chosen field, which is also something that other reenactors will be able to help you get started with. Incidentally, you'll also find reading recommendations from me at nativeoak.org, just throwing it out there. And if you're watching this video, if you follow my work, well then that probably sounds like a good time too. It should be fun. The research isn't a chore, it's the thing that gives context to your reenactment. It should be treated as an intrinsic part of the hobby just as much as going to the events, and it should be just as enjoyable, if not even more so. But if you're only interested in getting into reenactment as a way to run around and shoot guns, well, and there's nothing stopping you from getting involved, but I wouldn't encourage it. That, though, again, is a video for another day. So next, let's talk about age requirements, of which, once again, there are none, although this time with an asterisk. For example, in most groups, if you want to portray a soldier and carry a weapon, you might need to be at least 16 or 18 years old, and if you're a minor, you might need a guardian to be with you in the field. These are usually for insurance purposes and generally aren't terribly flexible, although some groups will allow younger people to take the field in non-combatant roles, or even as soldiers who just aren't actually firing, but are standing in the ranks to carry additional, water and ammunition, things like that. But for many other roles besides, there are no limits at all, and the youngest reenactor you might see at an event will still be in diapers. They won't be there on their own, of course. I really hope that they're not. But at least in 18th and 19th century reenactments, it's quite common for families to reenact together. And you'll often see young children at these events portraying, well, camp followers, portraying the children of soldiers, which they both are in real life, the children of the reenactor portraying the soldier, and they're portraying that same thing as well. That is a historically accurate role, and an important one, I would say, to have at the events. But that being said, if you are a young person that's looking to get involved and your parent or an adult who can be responsible for you, if they're not looking to get involved, I'm afraid that you would have a really hard time finding a group to accept a minor to just hang around their camp all day and helping to fetch water. There may not be many opportunities for you to do all that much either, unfortunately. And once you get outside of those time periods where families would be following the armies, more like late 19th, 20th century reenactment, well, those opportunities dry up pretty quickly unless the event specifically needs a civilian presence. A good rule of thumb, I think, is that if you're looking to get involved but you're too young to get yourself to the events on your own, well then odds are you wouldn't be able to join on your own anyways. And unless you have an adult who wants to get involved with you, it'd be better to just wait until you have a bit more independence to get started. That way obviously you'll have more to do in the hobby. You'll also have an easier time finding a group, and overall you'll have a much more fulfilling experience. Now let's talk about an unfortunately more awkward subject around those traits which are somewhat more permanent than your age, being your sex and your race. To be perfectly blunt, in many different reenactment communities, there are lawsuits waiting to happen because certain groups, which I will not name, let's not get into that, they will actively refuse to allow individuals membership, or at least refuse to allow them into certain parts of organizations based purely on those conditions. Now, I have a massive rant about how that's usually not a very good idea, but again, that's a video for another time. For our purposes now, we're just talking about you as an individual looking to get involved. Well, I think a good way to look at it is that if an organization isn't going to let you get involved, they're not going to let you play soldier because, you don't fit the racial or gender blah, 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 you're probably not going to want to get involved with that group anyways. As it is, those trends tend to be dying out pretty rapidly in the hobby, and the best groups typically won't have any issues with you so long as you have the aforementioned passion and are physically capable of everything within your control. You're willing to look the part. Sometimes, unfortunately, with women that can get into some difficult territory, but if you do what you can, right, and then so long as you're able to physically just do the tasks that are laid before you. In which case, then, the important thing, the thing that really all this hinges on, is that if you are playing a role that is contrary to your sex or race, and you can only obviously go so far to hide that, or in fact in your age for that matter, same exact thing. If you're a certain age that historically your role would not have been, the important thing is that you're upfront with the public about that historical reality. Don't just lie to the public and say, oh yeah, there were tons of artillery women in 1780 or anything like that. But I think the public is way more understanding of this than we maybe give them credit for a lot of times. Just explain that you're only a reenactor. You're portraying a role that would normally be filled by a different social group. We're not talking about a multi-million-dollar film where you can afford to hire extras for whatever you want and it's a paid gig where there are expectations and responsibilities. It's a hobby. You're there to have fun, to enjoy interacting with the public. Think of it more like a local theater group. People are going to be fine with that, right? Sorry, we're getting into the other video topic there a little bit. But at the end of the day, if you are, for example, able to find a role that both interests you and is also in line with your natural traits as well, As far as the educational display is concerned, all the better. And I would encourage you to do look into those roles, because it might surprise you just how many opportunities there are for really interesting impressions, whatever your background may be, whatever your, again, race or sex or age or physical, appearances may be. So long as you're willing to put in the work, there are a lot of opportunities out there, more than you may be thinking. Typically speaking, though, I do believe that if a person is capable of performing an authentic portrayal in all of those things that are within their control, then they ought not to be limited or excluded based on those elements which are outside of their control. Again, with the caveat that so long as you're not trying to lie to the public to make your reenactment group look better, the point is obviously teaching the real history, whatever that may be. So I think as well that is a trend that many organizations are beginning to follow. Just if you fall into one of those categories, if you are a woman, or if you are basically not white and you're trying to get into a hobby that is predominantly portraying like an old school European warfare, well, be prepared that you might have a few extra hoops to jump through in order to get started with certain organizations. But again, maybe it's just sort of a way to automatically and easily filter through the groups that you would want to join versus the ones that might have some more questionable ideals. Anyways, let's move on. Let's come to the next category, that of physical requirements. Reenactment, after all, isn't just standing around looking pretty, but it can be a fairly active hobby depending on your role of interest. Now, officially speaking, there are no fitness requirements, but it's important that you're physically capable of performing your role in a manner that both looks appropriate and, of course, much more importantly, is safe. If you can't rise from a kneeling position without a loud grunt and pushing on your own knee, or for that matter, much more severely, again, if you have like a really bad asthma problem, then you might want to reconsider becoming an infantryman, for example, who is going to be expected to run across wide open fields in heavy kit on incredibly hot days. I've seen individuals on the field before who probably shouldn't have been there, not only owing to their acting unrealistically, not being able to rush into cover, for example, but because it did seem to me that they were putting themselves in a dangerous position. In fact, I would think that that sort of thing, it can be way more common than it should be. And then people have the gall to complain that there's like a woman on the field. Somehow that's inaccurate, but the 85-year-old who's limping across, that's completely fine. That's a topic for another day, different video, right? But at the end of the day, point is that, if even myself, right, someone who looks like me can portray a soldier reasonably well, then obviously it isn't something that you need to be like super fit for. It's just, make sure that you're not putting yourself in a bad spot, right? And that's something that I think your prospective unit commander will be able to help you out with. They'll understand what's expected of the membership, what sorts of, what the events that they participate in tend to look like, how much running around you're doing, and how much physical activity you're doing, and what's going to be required. They'll, if you're genuinely not in a state where you can go out there, your unit commander really should be able to say, hey, look, we have all these other things that you can do with us, but this event I don't think is going to be appropriate just for your, where you are right now. It's completely fine, and it's for the most part not going to be a problem again. But yeah, the unit commander will understand what's expected of their own membership, and they can have the conversation with you to make sure that you are prepared for what that's going to look like. But then the question is, to have that conversation, you're going to need to find a unit to start with. How do you do so? Well, typically I say that the best thing you can do is to find an event that's local to yourself, to go there, and to speak with as many people as you possibly can. Even if you're not interested in joining a certain side, still, go over there, chat with them, ask them what the hobby is like for them, and what units they might recommend you look into on whatever faction or portrayal you're interested in. But then, okay, what if there are no events in your area? Well, firstly, if it doesn't seem like there are any reenactments in your area, you might want to consider whether it's realistic for you to get involved to start with, and what your ability to get to those events would look like. I've seen some people try to get involved with groups literally like halfway across the continent, it doesn't work very well. Most of these events are small, and traveling with kit, especially if you're a military impression, can be a real hassle. You don't want to spend hundreds of dollars or euros, pounds, whatever, on a flight or drive for 10 hours, all for a tiny regional event or a drill display that your unit requires. Also keep in mind, however, that long distances are kind of a default in the hobby, just not really that far of a distance. For example, when I was in Ohio, I would typically be driving for minimum of around 2 or 3 hours for the events. And then when I was reenacting in Massachusetts, it was a little bit easier. The closest events would be more like half an hour, 45 minutes away. But even then, the average was still closer to a 2 or 3 hour drive. Although, to be fair, in New England, those events were usually a lot larger and more exciting than the small local museum stuff that I was doing out in the Midwest. And whenever I do events in the UK, it typically means that I'm going on a train for a couple of hours, followed by a bus or a cab trip for that last 15 minutes or so, depending on how hard it is to get to the field where they're doing the event. The distances that are acceptable and make sense will naturally vary from person to person, and that's another part of what makes it so important that you go to see some of these events for yourself as a spectator first, and then you're speaking with as many people as you possibly can, trying to get a good idea of what would be acceptable for you, what would work for you. Now, if you're having a difficult time still finding those events to start on that decision-making process, well, as much as I hate to say it, social media is actually probably going to be your best bet. Facebook is an incredibly popular tool for organizing reenactments today, and it's a prime recruiting ground as well. It's probably the best way for you to find units, events, and larger umbrella organizations as well, all to figure out what the situation in your area may or may not look like. There are also a number of more general, more generic, hobby-oriented pages like, reenacting, show your impression, or whatever. And that can be a good place maybe to just ask around, see if you can find units in your area. Most units also have an Instagram account, and of course their own websites as well, although obviously those websites and such can be trickier to find if you don't already know, what you're looking for. As a last resort, you might also consider reaching out to some local museums, local gun ranges maybe, gun shops and whatnot. They may or may not have some connections, although that isn't something that I've ever done before myself, so I can't really attest to how well it would work or not. But really, at the end of the day, if a unit doesn't have a social media presence and their website is either like woefully outdated or just non-existent, well then odds are they're a smaller group that is maybe trending more on the elderly side, and you may or may not want to get involved with them depending on what you want to get out of the hobby. Which brings us then to our next question of, well, what do you want to get out of the hobby? What are you looking for? When you're looking for a unit, there are many different elements that you need to consider, and they go well beyond just the historical unit that they represent. It's a rookie mistake to just join the first unit you see because you think that their uniform looks cool. I mean, yeah, sure, they may have a cool uniform, but who's to say that that uniform is accurate? And are they a fun group that cares about the history, or are they literally insane in whatever way you'd like to imagine? Because, oh boy, there are some, let's just say, real gems in the hobby, and I've seen them all. Above all else, you have to treat this like you're going to be joining a social club, right? You want to make sure that you're going to get along with everyone in the unit, and that the experience that you're hoping for will line up with what that unit can provide. Do they have historical research and public education and involvement at their heart, or are they really just there to run around and shoot guns? Do they want to look authentic and accurate and research the uniforms and the materials and blah, 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 blah? Or do they just want to look cool and feel like they're in the Patriot or something, right? Is their leadership there to make sure that everyone is having a safe, enjoyable, and fulfilling experience, including on both sides of the field? Or is it maybe a little bit more of a game, even maybe a power trip for them, right? And then, of course, do they attend the sorts of events that you're interested in and do the sorts of things that you would like to do? You know, if you're interested in putting on active displays and doing parades and, really engaging with the public, well, you don't want to join a unit that, like, only does private tactical events, or even worse, a unit of, a bunch of people who just sit under a marquee all day drinking and complaining about their wives. Unfortunately, more common than it should be in this hobby. But, then alongside all of those wider questions of unit culture, there are also going to be a variety of more material concerns for you to consider. For example, where is the unit based? Are there any members that are close to you? How many members does the unit have? Do they have regular drill or event attendance requirements? How far do they typically travel for their events? And do they coordinate carpools to help make that happen? What umbrella organizations are they affiliated with, and why or why not? How old is the unit? How long have their members been involved with the hobby? Do they have any requirements beyond what I've already discussed in this video to join? Some units, for example, will expect you to sew all of your own clothing, although to be fair, they'll also usually help you in that process. It's mean to say, like, sometimes they have more stringent requirements that, even if they are helping you to, get along with those, it's something that you want to be aware of before you, really, really get involved and start dropping money and whatnot. And then, of course, what are the anticipated expenses, both to get started with the hobby and to maintain your membership? Are you expected to pay for your own ammunition, for example, if you're portraying a soldier? Or is that something that's provided out of central membership dues? What are those membership dues? What does their insurance plan look like? Are you expected to maintain your own reenactor insurance, or does the unit provide it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. See, as well, towards the end there, I was starting to get to the real elephant in this video, which is the financial requirements. And unfortunately, they can be quite significant. Depending on the impression that you want to take up, the finances could go anywhere from a few hundreds to multiple thousands of dollars, pounds, euros, or what have you. Even just the firearm alone can be many hundreds or well over 1,000 in the case of a musket, for example. Some units, however, will be able to help you on those costs, maybe either by loaning equipment. Loaner gear is quite common and it's really helpful. Or, for example, by making things in-house. If your unit has a good tailor or a gunsmith, for example, that's going to be a real asset, although even then you can expect to spend pretty significant amounts of cash on the materials for them to work with. You can imagine how, like, a Soviet Red Army World War II portrayal is going to be a lot cheaper. That's numbered in, like, the mid-hundreds for, like, the base portrayal, whereas if you want to play, like, Old Guard, Grenadier, Napoleonic War, that's going to be a lot more, right? The bearskin alone is going to cost like the same as the Mosin, right? Ultimately, I think at the end of the day, if you were to walk away from this video with any piece of advice, above all else, do not purchase anything whatsoever with the intention of using it at a reenactment without first having confirmed it with a unit which you are already accepted into, at which point that unit will be able to direct you in what you need to acquire from where. Do not assume that just because something looks right, it will be accepted. You could dramatically overpay. You could get something that's horrifically inaccurate, of course, and worst of all, and unfortunately very possible, you might just get outright scammed. For example, if you're interested in early modern reenactment, I would argue, this is contentious, but I would argue there really is no single place where you can just buy an entire outfit off the rack. I would recommend that you not ever, for example, buy a regimental coat off the internet unless you are in direct contact with the specific tailor who will be making it. And even then, get recommendations from other reenactors. Again, your unit, before you use that tailor, because they could be a little sketch. not only will an off-the-rack style outfit usually be made of inappropriate materials, but perhaps more importantly, it's probably not even going to fit you because, at least during the 18th century, all those uniforms were being handmade, custom-produced for the soldiers who wore them. Now, if you're getting more into civilian reenactment or in more modern-day reenactment, like early 20th century onwards, a time period where clothing is being mass-produced, 19th century, I should say even, but like anything that's a little bit more modern than early modern, there's a little bit more wiggle room, there's a bit more leeway as far as like how things are fitting and the exact machining methods and blah, 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 blah. But even still, even there, where it's a bit easier, you need to consult with your unit before you spend any money. For example, people ask me all the time where I got my World War I stuff, and it's actually pretty easy. I can just say, oh, I got pretty much all of it from this one website. But even still, I say, if you're joining a group, don't just take my word for it. Speak with them before you buy anything. That's where I got my stuff. That's where my unit wanted me to. But there are other options out there that you need to be aware of, right? Again, just the one lesson, always run every purchase by your unit, by other members, before you pull the trigger. Not only will that help to save you time and a lot of money, but it can ultimately end up with you being much more comfortable at your events and, of course, better looking as well. So there we have it, my friends. If you are interested in the reenactment hobby and you think that you may want to get involved at some point, then I hope that this video was helpful to you and gave you something to think about before diving in. Now, if you have any more specific questions about anything that I mentioned or didn't mention in this video, of course constrained to reenactment because otherwise it would be the totality of human knowledge, right, between those two categories. But the point is, please do feel free to reach out to me directly, and I will do my best to help you out. You'll always find the best, most up-to-date contact information with me by going to nativeoak.org and looking at the contact section. There you're going to find my social media accounts, whatever they may be at the time, my email, et cetera, et cetera. And typically speaking, social media is going to be a faster way to get into contact with me than email, unless it's like a business inquiry, which I tend to prioritize a bit more when it comes to the email. But in any case, overall, reenactment really is an amazing hobby, but unfortunately it can also be a tough one to break into, and there are sadly a lot of pitfalls that you need to watch out for. But remember, when you do get involved, that above all else, the purpose of reenactment is education. You are there to help educate yourself, your peers, and of course, the public. Try to view the hobby not merely as a fun time, of which it very much is, but also as a volunteer opportunity, as a collaborative effort to recreate historic environments. I'm definitely hoping to make some more videos on that idea in the future, but for now, I believe that I've taken up enough of your time, for which I am deeply appreciative. Thank you all for watching, and especially to those individuals who support the Native Oaks educational mission as patrons, and whose names you see scrolling before you now. If you'd like to learn more about any of that mission, our charity work, and how you might help to support it all, then please visit us at nativeoak.org. I apologize if I seem a little distracted now because the dog just ran in through the closed door. Aren't you very intelligent? Hope she doesn't start barking at a squirrel soon, that might be coming. But in any case, thank you all for watching, and until the next time, my dear viewer, I am, and I shall remain, your most humble and obedient of servants.